Hello, I'm Rachel, and if you're listening, you probably already know that. You have to at this point, right? If you don't, this is a podcast where I discuss the books suggested to me for the year 2019. The goal was to read 2 books a month to get back into the hobby, and to discuss with the person who got a hold of me over social media, but I guess it's been a long year for everybody. Next week is fucking hell at the end of the year already. For the last episode, I'll be reading House of Leaves, a true undertaking that I have not prepared myself for even a little bit. If you suggested that one, first of all, thank you for believing in me. Second, feel free to get a hold of me so we can get coffee, discuss it, maybe record a podcast together. If you didn't suggest it but have already read it and want to talk about it, you might just be my personal hero. For this, the penultimate episode of Title Pending, this is The Age of Reason by Thomas Paine, suggested by Ryan. Thanks, Ryan. And now, without further ado, to my fellow citizens of the United States of America, I put the following work under your protection. Published in 3 parts, The Age of Reason, being an investigation of true and fabulous theology, appeared in 1794, 1795, and 1807 during a time of social, political, and religious upheaval. Paine starts with the things he believes in as a deist, a monotheistic structure, heaven, the equality of man, all men, as he was an abolitionist, justice, mercy, and, quote, endeavoring to make our fellow creatures happy, unquote. He continues with what he does not believe in. Judaism, Catholicism, Islam. I'm using this word sort of as a translator. The word he uses in the text is Turkish. Any national or organized religion, basically. It should be said that he was writing this in response to movements in France, which had recently concluded the era of Enlightenment and moved forward into the Revolution. He notes that each religion has its own book, has its own figureheads, and has their own representatives who receive the word of God, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, quote, as if the way to God was not open to every man alike, unquote. Which, as a person who was raised mostly Christian with Jewish influences, would really have shook me when I was about 12. Quote, each of those churches accuses the other of unbelief, and for my own part, I disbelieve them all, unquote. It wasn't until I was taking classics courses in college that I really developed that similar stance. Many world religions have similar connections, similar books, similar threads, and Thomas Paine, in his time, is warranted in saying that they all hated each other. As countries shifted power and shifted which religions were allowed to be practiced, especially. We're not talking about something as old as the Crusades necessarily. This is happening now. And it is well within your personal right to look at a religion, its history, its practitioners, its rules, and say, I'm good out here. I love also this idea that he posits that if God talks to one person and that person talks to many, the revelation doesn't mean the same thing to the 4th person down the line, and at that point it's hearsay, according to Paine. That person could be saying that God told him anything. He often pulls ideas from the Bible but never quotes it. If the writing feels unedited and rushed, that's because Paine's fellow philosophers were being taken to prison and he saw the writing on the wall for himself. He wrote part 1 in a hurry and handed the manuscript off to a friend while he spent some time in jail. Part 2 is more focused. He takes a closer look at physical copies of the book in order to refute denials to Part 1 written by religious leaders. And while Part 1 focuses on the corruption of sanctioned religion, Part 2 is a vicious rebuttal to very specific figureheads of the Testaments. Yes, this section is long enough to have multiple chapters. Paine tries to use math and history to disprove the authors of the New Testament by saying that only by science may we find truth. Thomas Paine was one of the most well-known philosophers of his time. France claimed him, England claimed him, America tried to claim him, And the genius of his particular work here is that first he's writing about deism in a time of social, political, religious upheaval. He sees his chance and he goes for it. This is a piece that posits deism as the superior model of religion because it relies on ideals of the Enlightenment: science, history, facts, reason, while using these ideals to examine other religions. Second, the writing style is absolutely irreverent. This is intellectualism presented in such a way that might come off as cool, perhaps, to the upper class. The lower class didn't benefit too terribly much from the Enlightenment. That was mostly for people who were engaging in intellectualism, people in colleges, in politics, people with money, people who could read, which wasn't widespread into the lower classes yet. But philosophers read this and probably thought, wow, this guy is making compelling arguments, and he's doing it in a tone that makes it seem like other religions are worth mocking in a long-form pamphlet. Overall, how do I rate this? Call of Cthulhu wasn't a book either. Down Among the Sticks and Bones was a novella, and I've sort of been rating movies and TV shows along the way as well. Somehow historical documents feel a little harder. Mr. Paine, I respect you as a public figure looking down the barrel of a possible beheading and saying, here are all my thoughts on why religion that grips mine and other countries is bullshit. 5 out of 10 Rachels if I was grading this as a college professor. At the time, perhaps these ideas were radical, down with state religion, but you can't call out all religion by only delving into one particular book. You can't call out Judaism by using examples from the Old Testament, my man. It probably would have been hard to get your hands on a copy of the Torah, but for reason to prevail, we must synthesize all information before using only half of it to make a claim. Thanks for joining me this week. I hope you're spending the end of this year in plenty of reflection. Thanks, and Happy New Year. So Thomas Paine's father was a Quaker. He wasn't raised as a deist. That was something he found later on in his life. And many times with Quakers, they turn out to be abolitionists. The earliest American abolitionist writings were from Quakers. I know this because I wrote one of my last college history papers on Quaker response to American wars. So finding out that Paine was an abolitionist, unsurprising. What is kind of surprising is the way he broaches the subject of Jews. Now, the whole document is basically one big fuck Christianity and here's why with footnotes. But so much of his interpretation of historic Jews comes from the Bible. He calls them ruffians, cutthroats, rascals, corrupt, quote, addicted to cruelty and revenge, unquote. And this starts in at like the 20th mention of Jews in the document. Everything before then has to do with part of the list, for the most part, the list of world religions, causing Paine the inspiration for his pamphlets. Now, I can't say that I know anything of what Quakers in general think about Judaism. There are plenty of Christian sects that hate Jews as a public stance, but it's fascinating to me to know that he grew up as part of one of the peace religions and became so enamored with the idea of taking apart a religion by taking apart another religion by pieces. He was good right up until the end when I recognized this as a freshman poli-sci paper.